In one of the videos, you say the only solution is for Israel to annex the Gaza Strip and kill enough sons of bitches to make sure this isn't a problem again. You say anyone who calls for a ceasefire is a terrorist sympathizer.
I want you to think about how sick and demented that is. How sick and demented that is.
The case that none of your colleagues or you have been able to offer one single condolence, one single condemnation, one single word of sympathy.
Whether they will have power, whether they will have clean water, whether they will have medicine.
Ultimately, one of the things that I think people need to remember is that if you live in Gaza, and I was reporting there for many years and have spent time there since the last 15 or so years, for the majority of Palestinians there's 2.5 million of them roughly. It's a blockade imposed by Israel and Egypt, and that means basically you don't have freedom of movement, you can't leave when you want, you can't say study outside the country very easily, and that's suffocating. And this is not a defense of Hamas by any means. I've spent time with Hamas as a reporter in Gaza, and many Gazans I know don't like Hamas particularly in the past or now. But the truth is that when you occupy a people for decades, and I say that as someone who is Jewish, I'm a Jewish German Australian, and I've reported on this issue for 20 or so years, that I am surprised by obviously the timing of this, but at the same time not at all surprised by the reasons behind it. That somehow there's a belief that you can lock people up, occupy them, and of course let's not forget, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International and others have called what's happening in Palestine apartheid. That's their words. Every Israeli human rights organisation has called it apartheid. If that is the case for years, and it is, and I've reported on that myself, as have other journalists, eventually people will snap. People will break. You cannot continue to behave like this as a Jewish state, a self-described moral state, and expect Palestinians simply to lie down and accept it. When you occupy a people for that long, look, I don't accept and support the idea of taking civilian hostages at all. Condemn it 110%. I'm not defending that at all. But it's used as a bargaining chip. You see, one of the problems so much, and I've having reported about this for so long, is it's the framing here that we can get outraged in the West about the taking of civilians back into Gaza, fine, but there's far less outrage about the fact that every day this year, and for every year for decades, Palestinian civilians are killed in the West Bank and Gaza. They are killed by Israeli forces. That gets far less international outrage. Now, they're both wrong. Killing civilians is always wrong, regardless of who does it and where. But ultimately, to me, I think that double standard in so much how we as journalists report this is, in my view, a big part of the problem.
With all the issues that is ongoing between Israel and the Palestine, it's always advisable to hear both sides of the story so that you can make an affirmed decision, or maybe you can be more informed as to exactly what is going on. Because if there is one thing that the mainstream media have done is portray Israel as the entity that has been offended, and by so doing has all the right to defend herself. Be that as it may, it's also a good thing to hear the voices, or to even have some empathy for the people of Palestine who have been trapped in the middle in all this mess. So that is why I want us to watch this video, so that we can also hear some of the thoughts and opinions of fellow Muslims or people of the Islamic faith. So let's watch. And please remember, you can leave your thoughts and opinions in the comment section below, because like always, we appreciate hearing what you have to say.
In what the UN calls the unlawful and illegal occupation under international law. But to get us more informed, for those who are kind of in the gray zone, they hear this term often, Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's just a conflict. We got so many conflicts going on in the world. What's the big deal with this? And that's going to be my first question to my guest. Is this term Israeli-Palestinian conflict, is this a fair and accurate way to frame this issue amongst so many other questions that I'm sure you guys have? I'll be trying to ask him for you guys. and get his reaction to these with my next guest.
Alhamdulillah, Yari. How are you?
Good, alhamdulillah. You already heard my first question. I
Yes,
put it out
sir.
there. Did you get to
Yes,
hear
I did.
that? Yeah.
I did, yeah. I think that one of the main problems with the framing of this is that it intentionally sort of puts this on, equal power dynamics. So you got two equal opposing armies, you've got two equal opposing nations, you've got two, peoples that have been at it for centuries. And one of the things that Israeli propaganda takes advantage of, and honestly, American propaganda, which is basically an extension of Israeli propaganda, is that the public usually doesn't read beyond the headline. And so it's hit people with these outrageous headlines without fact checking, emotional exploitation, and then sort of spin the entire crisis as, oh, these are just, two peoples that have been fighting for thousands of years. We're not going to solve it now. The reality is that this is not a religious conflict spanning thousands and thousands of years. It's not like people have been fighting, Muslims and Jews, all this time over this land for thousands and thousands of years. This is an illegal occupation that was an extension of European colonization of the land of Palestine in 1948. And since then, you've had a global refugee crisis. Since then, you've had an expanding illegal occupation. If you put up a map and you went and you showed the expulsion of Palestinians from their homes from 1948 until today, there has never been a period in which that has stopped. And in that process, Palestinians have been killed. Their movement has been further restricted. They're a stateless people. If you're in Gaza in particular, 60% of the population of Gaza are actually refugees. They were expelled from other parts of Palestine into Gaza. So I have relatives in Gaza that I've never even met. They were expelled from different parts of Palestine, put into this open air prison, one of the most densely populated areas in the world, with all freedom of movement restricted, being bombarded routinely with the most sophisticated weaponry in the world, shut off from all sides. And, the daily incursions, the daily aggressions against the people of Gaza and the people of Palestine as a whole go completely ignored by the American media. So something as simple as, Gaza's seaports constantly restricted. The only way that people can eat when they are shut off from all the different directions in terms of land is they're fishing. And so routinely you'll have that radius shut down to where, you can no longer fish 11 miles out. Now it's 7 miles. Now it's 5 miles. The restriction of movement, the destruction of the hospital infrastructure, the bombing of the Egyptian border, which has been closed on the people of Palestine. And so if you're an American and you're watching the news and you're hearing, Netanyahu just saying all innocent Palestinians or all Palestinian civilians, he never uses the word innocent, of course, civilians in Gaza, we're warning you to leave. Leave where? Leave where? You're in this tiny place. And the only hope that you have is that the bombing does not hit your residential building. And the only calculation that you could possibly make is, do I go next door or not? Do I trust that, based upon whatever randomness I can decipher from these bombings, is it going to be, my cousin's building, or is it going to be my building next? And this is, of course, ignoring the settler violence. This is ignoring the apartheid system that has been imposed on the Palestinians. A legal system, or an illegal system through legal terminology, classed as apartheid by international consensus now. So it's not a conflict. You don't have two peoples, two states, two nations on equal footing. You have an occupier and an occupied. You have a colonizer and you have a colonized. And all of that is important context. And what the propaganda is doing is it's not just selling you a lie about what's happening now. It's completely intentionally ignoring the past so that people can be emotionally exploited as these war crimes play out in real time right in front of our eyes.
You mentioned the word apartheid. I want you to break this down. For some people, I haven't even heard this word. We hear this a lot. And is this considered also under international law? This is a crime. Israelis' rule over Palestinians has been described as this also by the South African freedom advocate and icon Desmond Tutu. You also have this being also put out by U.S. President Jimmy Carter, calling this an apartheid.
I don't think anyone could go to the West Bank and Gaza or even to East Jerusalem and see what's happening now to the Palestinians, they would disagree with my use of the word apartheid.
And you also had two leading human rights organizations, yes, Teen and Bestium, amongst others. So the question is, why is this term apartheid appropriate for this? And what does that mean, apartheid, for the average person? It's just apartheid. What does that mean?
Two separate laws for two separate peoples. You have one set of people that live under an entirely different set of restrictions. They live literally behind an apartheid wall. Every single element of a Palestinian's life is controlled by their occupier. They do not have equal right to any form of political participation, and they are completely shut out from being able to control their own daily needs and live like decent, dignified, normal human beings. I actually encourage people, because people don't read anymore, to go read the Amnesty report on apartheid, the Human Rights Watch report on apartheid, and actually go through the way that legal determination was made, because it is that important. Every single South African apartheid activist, starting not just with Desmond Tutu, but Nelson Mandela himself, has said that what is being done to the Palestinians is in many ways even worse than what has been done to to black people in South Africa.
He said it's worse. He said, this is Nelson Mandela. He was saying this is worse.
Desmond Tutu actually went to the territories and came back and said, in many ways, this is worse. Nelson Mandela says our freedom is incomplete until the Palestinians realize their freedom. So there's a deliberate misinformation campaign, again, about the present. There is a deliberate exploitation of the overall ignorance that people have of what takes place on a daily basis.
When I hear things like this, right, I get confused, because it's not like people don't know what is going on over there. It's not like people don't know that the people of Palestine, especially those that are in Gaza, have been subjected to this kind of treatment. Most people know about it. Most leaders around the world, they know about it. But how come no one is doing anything about it? How come no one is even willing to talk about it? How come the Muslim community, that I believe should be the first in fighting for the freedom and total liberation of the people of Palestine, not championing this cause? How come? Because you will expect that if you have a problem in your house, your parents will be the first people to come to your aid, followed by your neighbors, followed by people in your community, and then people from your from outside your community, and then people within your state. It has to start from within, right? So if Palestine is facing this problem, the first people who are supposed to be bagging and supporting Palestine should be the people in the Arabic community or the Muslim faith. Now, I'm not saying that people from other faith or denominations cannot support Palestinians in fighting for their cause. That's what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is, charity begins at home. If people within cannot even support one of their own, what do they expect from people without? What do they expect? You see, the Palestinian cause have been put to the back burner because even people who are quote-unquote savior of the Muslim faith have not really stepped up. People who are supposed to be helping Palestinians, at least the people, have kind of like don't even care anymore. And that is why Israel and its allies have just done things the way they want. How can you expect the people in Gaza to be living the way they are living And then Israel is making peace deal with Bahrain, with United Arab Emirates, and now they are going with another one with, I think, with Jordan. They have another one, yeah, with Jordan, and then also the one they are working out with, I think, with Saudi Arabia. How is that possible? And how none of these nations make it like a prerequisite for any deal with Israel, for Israel to step down this so-called barrier or blockade of Gaza. How come? You know? And then they will all stand and say they support Islam. They support people in the Islam faith. But they are willing to make deals with Israel, while Israel has blockaded the whole of Gaza. You just see? You just see how the whole thing goes.